All right, here with another episode of the Hyperformance podcast, back with a very esteemed guest. We're just sort of going over, we're actually going to reintroduce him to the show today because there's definitely a few new listeners since we've had him on. I'm joined, as always, by my faithful co-host, Jacob.
Hello, hello. Happy to be here.
And our special guest for the day is Thomas LILLEY. Thomas LILLEY, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you back on. Tom, I'll give you my perspective on Tom. He sort of, originally I started getting him on the show because I sort of viewed him as the #1 powerlifting coach in Australia. Sort of a lot of the things he said aligned with my natural bias as well. So I've always loved talking about those sorts of things with him. But over the last couple of years, he really has emerged essentially as, oh, see, this doesn't do you justice either. I was about to call you Australia's Hormozy. How do you feel about that?
Oh, I don't know. Tom Brosey, very like wish
Tom
version.
Brosey.
But yeah, he's basically, he's opened up to his, I think, opening his 8th powerlifting gym this year. He's also gone international with do we call it a powerlifting franchise or is it just 0 gyms?
Yeah, just gyms. So it's not a franchise model. I own them all.
Yeah, and then there's also some powerlifting drama that we're going to dip into. But Tom, before I interrogate you with all these questions I've got pre-prepared, can you just give people a little bit about your story, a little bit of your sporting history growing up? When did you get into barbell training? What was the distance between that and then realizing powerlifting existed? And then how did this foray into powerlifting go from the get-go?
Yeah, sure, man. More than happy to. So as you said, Thomas LILLEY own a brand called Zero, and we now have it's coming up to 8 gyms. There's only 6 open, but there's 2 more that are about to open. Like you said, we opened our first international one in the UK a month or 2 ago, and we've got New Zealand next year and a couple more on the cards as well. In terms of my sporting background, I'm not a sports guy. Like I played a bit of soccer in primary school and a little bit of ice hockey in high school. But my real love of sport is BMX. Like freestyle BMX is my favorite sport, always will be. That's what I competed in growing up. Along the way, I was a really big fat kid and I wanted to get shredded. My brother was muscular, so I wanted to be muscly as well. So I found the gym and originally just used it alongside BMX to sort of support that. Eventually I had a really bad spill on the bike and I was in uni and I was like, well, my brain's a bit more important than back then. There was no money.
Like Matt Hoffman bad? Matt Hoffman in the backyard with the wife running out the back?
No, not quite that bad. Like I messed up my head pretty bad. I'm pretty confident I'd be dead or at least a vegetable if I didn't have a helmet on. So helmet saved my life. Big proponent of helmets. But yeah, I had the maturity at the time to be like, look, I love BMX, but it's not going to make me a living. And I was at uni and I was like, oh, I still rode, but I really put it on the back seat. And along the way, I'd found powerlifting. I found powerlifting when I was 16 or 17, and I was doing it at the same time, but not very seriously. So once I gave up BMX, I went 100% powerlifting, and here we are today.
Nice. It's been quite a hell of a journey. You've gone on to coach. How many 300 kilo bench presses you got on your books now? I know you're keeping tally on the 300 kilo squats. Surely it's a bit easier to calculate quickly the 300 kilo benches.
300, I've coached the one and only in Australia. So that guy, Andrew Cooper, he's done officially 306.5, which is the number 9 bench of all time. He also did an equipped bench of 425. So he owns both of those titles. But I coached like most of the 500-pound plus benches in Australia have been my people. And then, yeah, with squats and deadlifts, both of them are over 60, 300 plus squats and deadlifts. So that's pretty cool. It's come a long way.
Yeah. Can you sort of speak to, I'm trying to think or do I just do the worst segue of all time? And do I just be like, tell me about this powerlifting drama? I was like, tell me about how you first got into like the volunteering and the coaching side of things. And what was that journey sort of like? How much of a segue would you like into this mess? Because when the APU drama, which some people who listen to the show will already be familiar with, when that all flared up again, I think Tom posted some anecdote about it in his story. And I was like, mate, Tom, we've got to get you on the show, yak about this powerlifting drama. What sort of context do you think people need to understand?
I was going to ask you, like, what's most important and relevant to your lifters? Because there's so much political bullshit, just like with weightlifting, right? I don't want to bore people too much.
I mean, that's sort of it. I think people are just confused with the state of the sport. and then like why it's actually important to have a tested federation in Australia that's affiliated with the IPF, and then just some of the issues as well that seem to surface time and time again in niche sports in general, but also it just seems like powerlifting is just stuck on this endless loop, at least on the tested side in Australia. Like, does any of this shit happen to the same degree on the untested side?
It definitely does, but probably a little bit more on the sinister front of things. The problem with powerlifting, and
someone tainting the trend.
Yeah, the problem with powerlifting is that it's just a copy paste model. So someone just gets pissed off at the system. They're like, I don't like this, or I don't like these people. I'm going to do my own thing. Then all they do is copy and paste this exactly the same federation and change the 2 or 3 things that they don't like, but bring with it all the same issues and dramas and problems that the old federation had. I'm sure it's like that in a lot of niche sports that have these multi-federation things, but in Australia historically, so for those who don't know, IPF is meant to be like the gold standard federation. It's meant to be the #1 drug tested federation. It's got IOC recognition, so it's attached to WADA. Why are you laughing?
I forgot how big of a thing that was for a little bit before it died down again. When people were like, yeah, powerlifting, it's going to be in the Olympics one day. It's like the IOC is so sick of sports where people are doing drugs, or that they look at as a risk of people doing drugs. I'm like, there's no way they're going to throw out weightlifting and be like, powerlifting, that'll be better.
Isn't the highest number of positive tests, doesn't it come from like shooting or something? Like for beta blockers or like, I don't know, Adderall, Ritalin, whatever.
No, it is. Yeah. Absolutely.
Is Adderall a banned substance?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Wow.
Yeah, because it was Simone Biles. She didn't compete in a competition because she couldn't get a TUE for her Adderall or whatever she takes for her ADHD or something like that.
Yeah. So historically, it's about it all comes down to that. It's like IPF is touted as this the gold standard of powerlifting. And in many ways it is, in the sense that it has the most international recognition. So when you're looking at like the world stage of drug tested powerlifting, there's going to be nothing bigger and better than that. Or historically, there hasn't been anything bigger and better than that. So I understand the allure of it. From a modern perspective, I really don't understand the allure of it at all. And this isn't just some like jaded old man yelling at cloud kind of thing. Like there's very little that people get out of competing at the top level of the IPF. You have to self-fund. There is no reward for winning. There's little money in the sport in general. The only thing that's changed the game has been Sheffield. I don't know if you're familiar with.
I was literally about to say, does Sheffield change your perspective on this? But it is just one paycheck for 6 lifters, essentially.
Sure. Like Sheffield prize money is huge. It doesn't necessarily change my perspective, A, because it's so exclusive, but also B, because it's the SBD show, not the IPF show. So it feels very much more SBD than IPF. And there are so many other federations doing big prize money comps that can actually change people's lives. So I still don't completely understand the allure of the IPF outside of the hype. The really tough thing as well that I think Australian lifters have always either overlooked or not understood is that the WADA standards of drug testing, of course, is the gold standard. But the amount of tests that actually get done in Australia for powerlifting is it's tantamount to nothing.
Did we get sold a pipe dream? Because I have also heard about this, people being critical of certain federations claiming to be drug tested, but not being actually able financially to promise the degree of drug testing that they can promise it is relatively clean sport. Because it's something I've only somewhat recently come to terms with, finding out how expensive high quality drug testing is. And because I emceed USAPL comp, and I think one of the ways they've sort of got around it, because they're trying to increase the amount of drug testing, it's hard enough to get referees as it is. Now, instead of just red lighting some big guy's squat, you've also got to go collect his piss after the competition. It's just...
Yeah, so this is the thing, right? That language, or that sort of like, oh, their drug testing is illegitimate, that's always come from the top down. So it's come from Robert Wilkes, it's come from Sean Muir, it's come from the top down, like the presidents of the IPF, which are obviously trying to defend their spot. And so, yes, WADA is the gold standard, but what good is the gold standard if you never test anyone? Like, what good is having a gold standard if you do 2 or 3 drug tests a year? That's pathetic.
Also, when I'm hearing that multiple thousands of dollars for a fee for a drug test, that's the
Yes.
WADA fee.
Yes.
And it's APU or any IPF affiliate which has to use the WADA drug testing.
Correct. Yeah. So to do IPF drug testing, you have to do it through WADA. This is the hurdle that APU ran into when they first started up, and now the new federation APLA is running into, is getting the Australian Sports Commission recognition so you can get subsidized testing via WADA is extremely fucking difficult.
How much of our tax dollars go into?
Oh, I don't know. It can't be that much because they do hardly any fucking testing. So, but this is the thing, right? So in Australia, we've got the pipe dream of like, yeah, gold standard WADA testing, but A, there's hardly any testing for one. B, we're in Australia. Think of all the other countries in the world that don't have the infrastructure to have this set up. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this. I've coached the national PNG powerlifting team. I've coached the national Fiji powerlifting team. I've been heavily involved in the Pacific Islands. And I can promise you, there's not a lot of testing going on over there. They don't even have the labs to do it. They don't have the capacity or the existing fucking organizations to do it. And that's just one subset of the entire world population, right? Think of all the other countries in the world that are bringing teams.
Well, Poland and Kazakhstan, who were like quite competitive in the IPF, I know that they were essentially doing 0 out, at least. So I don't even know about in competition, but I know out of competition, they were just 0 for a whole bunch of years.
Yeah. No, you've got the safety net of like, again, I've coached the Papua New Guinean powerlifting team. These guys can't afford to eat. They're not buying illegal drugs. Like, I'd be very confident that they're not taking steroids. However, it raises the question of like, how legitimate is the testing on the world stage in terms of other countries doing their own individual testing? And again, what I always come back to is what good is the testing if it doesn't even happen? And so when you look at, like you said, refereeing at USAPL and then having drug control officers conducting the testing, that's the trade-off you get. You get cheaper testing. The testing is definitely legitimate. So now I have insight into this. Obviously, I'm involved with the biggest federation in Australia at the moment, APL, and there's a testing arm.
Flex.
Yeah. There's a tested arm of the APL.
So just let's clarify that as well, because I was sort of thinking about things like, oh, we've got these two big dogs going at it. It's APU versus USAPLA, which we should probably clarify what the fuck that is for everyone outside of the powerlifting world, because that's just an interesting adjunct to this. But APL has the highest amount of lifters actively competing.
Yes. Yeah.
This is your federation.
Yep.
So most powerlifting gyms, most people competing in your fed must be doing a few things right.
Well, the federation I'm involved with, Daniel Carpenter's federation.
Would you say there's a few people that slip through the, that is quite obvious, that slip through the cracks? Have there's been any stories of like, okay, we kind of see that you've gotten away with murder here with any of the lifters?
I mean, it's all speculation, right?
Okay.
Or so it's speculation or secondhand stories.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, I don't want to get too deep into that. I'd say if you know the system well enough, it would be in the IPF, it would be possible. But I mean, you just look for the signs, you know, if someone's squatting 400 in training and then ending up with 360 in competition, that's a pretty significant gap, even for a bad day or a poor performance or whatever.
Right. Yeah, I get it.
So there's certain things you could look for, but I'm a bit of a, I prefer to look on the brighter side. I'm pretty trusting. I like to think that drug-free sport is truly drug-free. And so like with the drug testing, now seeing the side of it outside of WADA, being heavily involved in APL's drug testing. So we use the same lab as USAPL uses over in the States. The drug testing is very thorough. And we've taken people who we know are using drugs to test this, because I always wondered, it's like, yeah, that's all well and good to send piss away from people who shouldn't be on drugs. But what if we just take someone who's juiced to the gills and see if it actually,
let's see if this shit works.
See if it actually works. So we've done it several times. Like, we keep checking on it because it's like, we want to check that this is legitimate, and it's legitimate.
Have you ever got anyone to just do a little cycle, or you just got some of your untested boys who
pretty much. Yeah,
Right. Okay,
just taking someone who's clearly very untested and happy to provide a sample for us to send away. And obviously, none of that gets published. It's more just about us having the peace of mind that if someone's taking something, they're going to get tested, or they're going to get popped. But yeah, the trade-off you get is, okay, well, now we know the top 10% of tested lifters are being tested at every single comp. Yeah, it's not WADA. Yeah, you don't have the officers. Yeah, you don't have the special bottles with the secret locks and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I mean, again, I take the trusting side of things. It would be pretty hard for you. Think of the elaborate strategy you would need to taint your own piss, or to provide clean piss in a scenario where someone's standing outside the door. Like, how are you going to do it? It's going to be quite hard to cheat. So while there are potentially if you have some secret bladder with like a special tube up your sleeve, there could be maybe
everyone talks about the fake dicks and stuff like that.
I heard that.
Like, that's quite a bit to handle when you just, you're spent by the end of the day. You've got to angle this second penis into the cup somehow. You've got to have your bladder of clean piss sitting on your person somewhere under the suit. Like, I think a lot of people who are believers in clean sport, that it is majority clean, you're often played out. Same as like conspiracy theorists, when you don't believe the Earth's flat, they're like, you're so naive. You just take the stock standard story. What is your sort of response to that? Because I'm a believer as well.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I guess a lot of these stories, like fake dicks, that's not going to come from powerlifting. That's going to come from someone trying to get to sprinting in the Olympics, right?
Yeah, no one can afford one in powerlifting.
Yeah, and there's no real reason to do that. The other big difference that you've got in powerlifting is if you want to get juicy, there's juicy divisions. Like, go test, go compete in the juicy division.
It's extra bad. Like, I've heard of people doing like EpiPens in the background of those meets and stuff like that. It's like literally not just steroids, like literally whatever you want in the system, like fully untested.
Yeah.
Oh,
yep.
Wow.
So I think it bolsters the case that that most people are doing the right thing. So I take this innocent approach, I guess. And that doesn't make me any less serious about protecting the sanctity of drug tested sport. Because I think you're a fucking piece of shit if you're going to take gear and compete in tested fed. Like,
but is there any part of you that thinks that people who don't take drugs to powerlift should get over competing in tested federations? A kick that I've been on recently is, I know steroids help you get stronger. I've been thinking about it more in a track sense, but it sort of played through this thought process of like comparing tested and untested bodybuilding, night and day, right? Like you see the difference. There's no getting confused there. Tested and untested powerlifting is tenfold closer. But then there could also be some talent pool things there. I know drug tested powerlifting just has a way bigger talent pool to draw upon, but then I'll trickled all the way down to, man, people really get their tits in a twist over drugs in sprinting. But I'm thinking, like, I reckon I could run the hardest cycle known to man and probably put on 5 kilos of contractile tissue, blow my Achilles, and not even finish the race. I'm like, I actually think it's pretty hard to jab your way to, like, fast 100-meter time. But how much of a difference should people just get over it, especially more in the sense of if you're genuinely talented and there's big prize money on offer, or is it just that they're then not allowed to go back into tested competitions?
Yeah, I mean, like there's several layers to that, right?
Sorry, monster of a question.
No. I like the comparison of like if I just jumped on, because I mean, having done this for a long time, having coached a broad sample of both tested and untested lifters, it's always quite surprising. And I mean this in the nicest way possible. I mean, there's no nice way to say it. Some people are just weak. And some people who blast gear cycle after cycle are also just weak. Just like people who go to the gym and blast steroids to get big and don't actually get that big or don't look that good. There's an element of either you've got it or you don't have it. Even in untested powerlifting, and again, this is just my innocence, I suppose, I don't actually like when it becomes a competition of how much can you take versus how much can you lift? Like how close to that canary in the mine situation are you willing to go? And I mean, it's the death of longevity as well. Like you look at when I was up and coming, you look at all the lifters that were the equivalent of Instagram superstars these days, your Pete Rubishes and those guys that were just like blowing up and come out of nowhere kind of thing. None of them are still going. I respect the guys that have been just fucking grinding away for ages. And you can do that untested, but it takes a great deal more maturity in order to do that. But like you said, the craziness of the talent pool in tested powerlifting is wild. A lot of the best lifters in Australia are tested.
With, for example, someone like Theo, who we're going to talk about in a sec. No, let's not talk about Theo because we're going to get to that mess later. There's so many people who are like 21 knocking on the door of world records. Is it necessary to have longevity? How do you view that? Like, is it better just to have this crazy season, nab a bunch of records, and then ride glorious out into the sunset? Or is there something to be said for relevancy over a 10-year period? Like, what sort of stock do you place in either of those two things?
Depends what you want out of it, really. Like I think longevity is always the way to go, especially with the kind of talent that we're seeing in young kids these days. But I mean, they're also kids. Like and I mean that genuinely. Like if you're sub 25, you're still very much a kid, and there's a great chance that your interests are going to change. You're going to shift priorities in life, whether it is you get married, have kids, chase a career, whatever it is. So it comes down to really what you want to achieve. I think it would be unwise to purposefully hold someone back that's making great momentum, but at the same time, I think it would be unwise to push the envelope too far to the point where you're walking that line. And I mean, this is an interesting thing as my evolution as a coach. Previously I was working with anyone and everyone. Now I'm working with just the cream of the crop kind of thing. And the coaching aspect is slightly different in terms of just as you'd know and appreciate when you're working with an athlete, and I mean an athlete with an athletic mindset that's really the top of the game. There's a lot of advising from the best position possible, sharing your knowledge and experience, but ultimately the athlete is going to decide what they want to do with it. And my goal is to have the best impression possible based on the real life examples that I can provide them with. And I think that's one of my strengths as a coach with these people is I can be like, look, you're very much like this person, and this is what happened when they did this. So my suggestion is that we do this so you can achieve this, which is what you want, yada, yada, yada. It's getting a bit off track there.
It's that pattern recognition.
Sure.
Yeah. Sort of what I was looking to segue into is people have often romanticized just like, oh, I don't want to listen to so-and-so's advice because they take drugs. So all the things that they think about training don't apply to me. As someone who's got people competing at high levels and has produced really good results on both sides, when you're sitting down to program for someone, are you factoring in their steroid cycle, or is it more about heuristics of like, oh, they're a strong person, so all really strong people, like maybe lower frequency is a heuristic, and are there those heuristics for strong people? Because I think I've heard you, correct me if I'm wrong, talk about people overhype the difference between males and females, and you're like, nah, it's more about big people, tiny people, stronger people, and weaker people.
Yeah, pretty much. It all just comes down to experience level, because a lot of this stuff balances itself out, right? So if we get Jacob and we blast him with a whole bunch of trend and he's doing lifting,
hell yeah.
Of course, he's going to get really strong really fast. We're not going to predictively program for that. We're going to reactively program for that. Oh, the numbers are way too easy. Let's bump them up. We're not going to be
first cycle is a weekly reactive approach.
I didn't say that. We're not going to assume, okay, well, gear is going to make your recovery better, therefore you can do more, because that's going to get offset by the intensity. There's certain things that gear is going to do to a body that people don't talk about as part of the training paradigm. You're going to get bigger around the joints. You're going to lose range. You're going to get more muscle tone. That all stacks up to, produce potential for pain or injury or all of this sort of stuff that has to be taken into account. So the best advice is program normally and then change what needs to be changed. Notice those trends, and then you can try and predict those trends next time. But the other big factor that you've got, the other big unknown in all of this is, okay, let's give Jacob a bunch of trend, test, and D-bol. I don't know if it's actually trend and test and D-bol. If it says 200 milligrams per mil, how do I know that this time around he hasn't gotten a dud and that he's not going to respond the same as last time? How do I know he hasn't been taking other stuff that he hasn't told me about? How do I know that his sensitivity to these drugs hasn't changed? So there's so many factors that essentially just cancel each other out to the point where you just like you program a noob, they make noob gains, you change it as you go. You program someone who's gone from a huge calorie deficit to a huge surplus, they're going to get really strong really fast, you change it as you go. It would be the time in my programming where I am the most reactive based on what I see in front of me. Again, you pick up trends, you can make assumptions the more experience you get, but ultimately you have to take the data that's being produced right in front of you and be smart about the decisions you make moving forward. But
so you've essentially got to find someone who loves smash and tin, who's willing to do a whole bunch of steroids, who also wants to do their meal prep and eat their veggies and get 8 hours sleep. It just seems like that's so paradoxical in terms of what you're looking for to be the ultimate untested lifter.
Yeah, people moving into untested though, especially if they've got good guidance, they need to have all their ducks in a row, because the gear doesn't make that huge of an impact. It's like the bulk of your recovery and performance is going to be determined by the regular performance and recovery factors. Are you eating well? Are you sleeping well? Are you doing all the right things? You're following the program, you're training hard. You still have to do all that shit. The gear is a very small percentage of that. That's where people go awry. They expect it to do a whole bunch of shit. They're like, it's not working. So they take more. They're like, still not working. Take more. Before they know it, they're just like bloated, pimply, tear a tendon off, and that's game over.
Can you quantify it into like a percentage? And I know you wouldn't want to, because you don't like being wrong. And if you're just like, oh, taking gear gives you 10%, then there'll be a bunch of people whose strength fucking doubled. There's a bunch of people who went nowhere. But more just for the listeners, because I feel like there is this stereotype in some people's head that gear just does everything and it unlocks all these superpowers. So like, at your best shot, can you just give at a population level how much you think it influences the average untested saucy person's total?
Yes, I would say like a 5 to 10% boost per compound, maybe, that you've added in, but it is hard to quantify. The thing I really want to get across to people is that the rate of progression, the rate of progression in the midterm is the same, right? So again, let's create a base cycle for Jacob. He's taking a bit of test, a bit of deco, something like that. He'll get an initial boost, which might be like that 5%, 10% jump on his training numbers. But his rate of progression from there will be about the same as someone who's not taking gear at all.
Oh,
right.
So the average progression over an extended period of time is going to be higher because you've got that boost. But expecting like massive jumps in your numbers, comp after comp after comp, taking that same amount is unreasonable. It's just pushed you to that next level. And again, this is where especially young people go awry, is because they start to expect, they're like, oh, my first cycle, I added like 50 kilos to my total and I kept running that. And then the next comp, I only added 5 kilos to my total. Therefore, I need to take more. No, you need to appreciate that getting stronger takes time, gear or no gear.
Well, and then psychologically dealing with an off season, I imagine then you start to deal with bigger fluctuations in your level of strength as well. Or is this a stereotype of the blast and cruise yesteryear of people? Are you just marinating year round now? What's best practice?
Yeah, no, I mean, like the whole blast and cruise thing is probably still the approach. It's just not that language is used as much, and maybe the parameters around it are slightly different.
People got insecure about saying, I'm blasting.
Yeah, pretty much. Because I mean, there's so many assumptions that comes with that, for sure. But again, untested people have to deal with the psychological hurdle of going from feeling their strongest to feeling significantly less strong unless they're willing to take unhealthy amounts of gear all the time, which they shouldn't be, because that's dumb. But there are going to be these ebbs and flows in the amount of gear that people are taking. And with that comes ebbs and flows in performance, and outside of just gym stuff, just how you feel day to day, energy levels, body composition, sex drive, everything gets affected by these ebbs and flows. And, in dealing with lots of these lifters that go through this, can be a pretty hard psychological pill to swallow, from going from feeling like fucking superhuman unstoppable to feeling like a normie again. It's not very nice.
Yeah, absolutely. So many of the answers that you've given us to these questions, they just come from this playbook that you have built into your coaching system, it seems. I think we sort of touched on this on one of your previous appearances, but it's one of my favorite topics to delve into because you are someone as well who really sort of adheres to a systems-based approach and having a coaching system. And another simultaneous conversation that's sort of been happening in this industry is just the saturation of opinions and educational content on social media. And I feel like there's so many coaches who are always appealing to authority and they're just blowing in the wind. They really have trouble navigating all this information because they just don't have the balls to take a stand and have a system that's actually built around their needs. Or how do you approach this conversation with coaches, like explaining to them that you do have to have a system, like you don't completely rethink your entire training process for everyone that walks in the door? Like, how do you rationalize it in your mind? How do you approach that conversation with other coaches?
I normally use examples of places in which they already do it. Like, I harp on about this whole gold standard technique bullshit. When I'm talking about that to people who strongly disagree with it, no, you got to take an individual approach and everyone's a special snowflake. Like if I gave you 10 people right now and told you to teach them how to breathe and brace, you'd probably breathe and brace. You'd teach them all the same thing. It's like there's an area of the body that you're willing to admit this is how I teach it. And I haven't had anyone clap back at something like that. And it's the same with programming. If I gave you 10 lifters and said, I know you're going to hate this term, write a hypertrophy block for this person, they're going to write pretty much the same thing. Or write a development block for this person, write a training block with these outcomes. They're going to write the same thing because every coach in their head has a skeleton or a framework of like, here's my 20 exercises that I'm go for. Here's my 10, 15 cues that I'm going to use. It's just some people are more willing to put that all out there and see it out in the open and craft their system from it and admit that they use a system. We all use systems because people are scared to admit it or don't believe it. And so constantly change their systems because they're being influenced, like you said, blowing in the wind. I try and encourage people to deep dive into what they're currently doing and figure out where their systems are so they can critically analyze what they're already doing, because guarantee they're already using a system.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just one of those things where like, if you want to coach a lot of people and like, if you want to have something that you can actually advertise, because otherwise, if it is just always this completely bespoke approach, I don't understand from a marketing perspective what you're leaning into other than results. But then again, it's like the way you get results is by having the system that underpins it at the end of the day.
Yeah, and man, just from a work efficiency standpoint, I mean, you imagine you had to redesign every single thing you did for every client that you worked with or every coach that you mentor. Be a fucking nightmare.
Are you sympathetic to coaches who don't have as many 300 kilo squatters? Because do you think something as well that's helped you stand by your system? And again, this is paradoxical as well, because everyone should be producing results to some extent. But I guess that probably impedes people earlier on in the journey because you might be listening to this Thomas Lilley bloke talking about his beliefs that diverge from yours. It's like, well, if he's producing the better results, so I guess you don't have anyone you can look to who's like objectively crushing you in the powerlifting game. Hey, I can't contrast you with anyone.
Yeah, I mean, like if you take a subsample of, you ask anyone who are the top powerlifting coaches in the world, and you're going to get some pretty stock standard answers, and they're going to be using
Jailhouse Strong, Thomas Lilley. Who are the? Can you give us the top 5 off your top of your head, or?
I think more like Mike Terscherer, Bryce Krawczyk, like Calgary Barbell, RTS. Joey Flex, rather than like the top coaches, more likely the more renowned coaches, and they'll all be using different structures and systems for sure. You just have to be able to accurately or confidently justify why what you're doing is working, and that means going back to the principles and being like, okay, Joey Flex and them use RPE based programming. There's a lot of like pass the autonomy onto the lifter, but why does that programming work? Why does them doing hyper frequency, hyper specificity get results? And you can unpack that and work that out. And so that doesn't necessarily mean you have to do that. You just have to understand the principle and see how you can apply that principle in whatever method you're choosing to use. Because my method's very different, but if we're satisfying the same principle, progressive overload or whatever you're looking at, then you're going to get some sort of result. And then it just becomes get confident in your result, have the answers to all the questions. If you find a better answer, change your system. You have to be confident, but not cocky enough to the point where you're ignoring evidence that's right in front of your face.
What are the emerging trends in powerlifting, coaching, or programming meta that frustrate you, that you just think, nah, majorly overhyped, just maintain with the status quo on this? There's no need for a pendulum. Or is there anything where you've seen a pendulum swinging and you think it's gone too far? I think one of the biggest ones that, when I've been a part of it, I'd love to have a discussion about like knee cave. And just like clarifying, like when we say that, like, don't worry about your knee cave, what do we actually mean by that? And you might actually say, do worry about it. And where are you coming at it from with that perspective?
I'm only ever coming at it from strength. I'm only ever coming at it from strength. I'm never looking at it from injury, because how the fuck do you know if someone's going to get injured or not? Like, you don't know that. You can measure the absence of injury. You can sort of quantify injury risk based on experience, but that is so airy-fairy. Yeah. Because like, I mean, if I get time while we're still on it, I'll send you a video of a case study that I used in the coach development course when I ask, is this technique safe? Because you can't measure safety. And it's this guy's back is completely rounded. He's doing a set of 10 squats.
No, it's Worm Chad.
No. It's not Worm Chad, but similar. This is a guy that I personally coached.
All right.
But yeah, similar. Like, you can't look at that and be like, that guy's going to hurt his back, because he could deadlift forever like that and never hurt his back. Therefore, on paper, that's safe technique. So we should all use that technique if it's safe, right? You can't look at it like that. So when I'm looking at knee cave, I'm looking at, from my experience, from my understanding of movement in the squat, from my understanding of my belief of what the gold standard squat is caving knees going to contribute to the strongest possible squat? My answer is going to be no. Does that mean if I see knee cave, I'm going to have a fucking heart attack and freak out? No. I'm just going to work towards whatever that gold standard I believe is. And in doing so, I've seen great outcomes. That doesn't mean I'm 100% right. It just means I'm confident in my system and it's producing outcomes. And so as long as it's doing that, which is why I would never get on a post like yours where you showcasing weightlifters and being like, this is what's happening. I'd never go in there and be like, no, this is wrong. It's like, well, they're probably going to say exactly the same thing. Then it becomes, Muslims versus Christians. We're both right. We're both right. And you're not going to convince us, and you're not going to convince the other party that they're wrong. It's just like, accept that people have different beliefs, accept that people can get results using different systems. That's totally fine.
I like that you touched on the need to remove the idea of safe or unsafe or potentially injurious movement. And from a technical model, you need to look at it from a purely performance-oriented perspective. And in a certain sense, that is encompassing of like safety.
Absolutely.
If you can even quantify that anyway, but it just declutters it so much, because there's so many things that people let ebb into their technical model. And when you ask them why, they're like, oh, because it keeps you safe. But then once you sort of accept that, fuck, injuries just sometimes they happen, then all of a sudden it's like, why am I doing this thing anymore?
Yeah, the first question I ask people in my coach development course is, what is the definition of good technique? And the most common answers are along the lines of the strongest, the safest, the most efficient way to move the weight for the individual. It's like, okay, let's rule out the individual straight away, because to get an individual definition of technique, would have to have a case study of every individual, then get an average and say that's the individual. We can't do that. Throw that out of the window. Strength, easy. We can measure that. You're either strong or you're not strong. Simple as that. Safety, we can't measure. We can measure the absence of injury. Efficiency, measuring efficiency. Like when people say, oh, that's an efficient movement, it's like movement. It's like, what? And so efficiency also often gets blurred with other stuff. It's like, okay, efficiency is a straight up and down bar path. So I'll show them a video of like this guy with the rounded back. And I'm like, so this is good technique because the bar path is straight up and down. It's efficient, right? They're like, oh, well, no, because his back's round. It's like, well, you're just saying these things because other people say it and it sounds really good. And it does sound good. If you're in a technique session with me and I'm like, look, Jacob, man, we're going to take you through the strongest, the safest, the most efficient way to move the weight, because that is going to get you the best outcome. If you say it with enough confidence, it sounds fucking awesome. And no one's going to be like, what's efficiency mean? You know, But if we need to question ourselves on this stuff that we say that sounds good and be like, do I actually mean this? What can I define this? What is the answer to that question? And if we can't do that, then what the fuck are we doing? We need to figure it out.
Because even with the efficiency thing, like I think immediately what popped into my head was people putting their feet out closer and closer and closer. Because again, people are like, oh, sumo, well, you just shorten the ROM. But it's just like, yeah, good luck ungluing that heavy barbell from the floor when you've just like maxed out the ROM. But that was going to be one of my questions for you. How do you sort of balance? Obviously, you know, you're not looking to increase the ROM unnecessarily. Do you find yourself often technically coaching your lifters into trying to shorten ROM? Is that ever something that comes up?
No, I mean, like it's going to be an outcome of adhering to what I call the three biomechanical rules in each lift. Part of that, if they're achieving these three biomechanical rules, is going to be minimizing the range of motion.
This is the LILLEY big three.
Oh, don't you freaking dare.
Yes.
No. Like, I mean, decreasing range of motion comes at a price. At some, like, ultimately, you know, I'm dealing with powerlifters. Powerlifting is about moving the most weight. So if you go ultra wide on your sumo and you move less weight, is it efficient? No, you're moving less weight. And so, I mean, there's more to it than that. Of course, you know, you have to have the foresight as a coach to be able to predict relatively accurately what that's going to look like over time. You know, it's the question people always ask, oh, am I better suited to conventional or sumo? Better suited to which one you pull more at. And I can help you figure out which that is going to be, but it's not about how you build. It's about how much you lift. Jason Semler, who had the biggest bench in Australia before Andrew Cooper, the guy with the 300 plus, he was very tall, super long arms, barely retracted his scaps, completely flat back, completely flat feet, no arch whatsoever, range of motion of like 600 meters, and he benched more than anyone in the country. It's like, at the end of the day, it's like strength wins in powerlifting. That's what matters.
It's so hard because as much as you can't rationalize everything, like you're always trying to, and like with that guy with the long arms who's just a bench hero, like, is it just, you know, his diaphragms in his ribcage create more pressure, or his tendons have different insertions that just have a little bit, like there's so much shit that you can't see. Like, do you think people they get too depressed about their limb lengths?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, nothing pisses me off more than when someone says I have long femurs. What the fuck does that even mean? How have you quantified that your femurs are long? You don't have long femurs. You just have an ugly squat. There's a very big difference between the two things.
Yeah.
Like that, show me the chart that determines whether your femurs are long, medium, short. Like, show me the chart that exists.
Yeah, unless you've got NBA teams hitting you up, maybe just shut the fuck up on that one. Because how tall is Thor? Thor has to have long femurs, doesn't he? Like, for the purposes of the conversation.
6'8", wow.
Yeah. Whereas like his dunk, is this? Oh, actually, I don't know if he's dunked 1,000 pounds, but it's close. So I saw he was hyping himself up for a 520 deadlift the other day. Do you reckon Thor was sitting there in bed watching Theo attempt 506 kilos?
Oh, I don't know.
I wonder about that. Just because the timing was a little bit suspicious. Was he just like, nah, fuck this 21-year-old?
Yeah, I don't even know what you're talking about with the 520. I have no idea what you're on about.
So Thor, because I thought he was done. Like, obviously, he chipped Eddie Hall's record in his home gym. I don't know how you feel about that, but then he sort of rode off into the saucy sunset. Well, so I sort of had this idea in my head. I think he was complaining about health issues or something like that. But then he sort of made a bit of a comeback for a powerlifting competition. But I sort of was under the impression that he was never going to get back to the size that he was before to originally break the deadlift. But then, like, well, and this is a weird thing as well, because at a certain point when you're getting bigger, your deadlift just doesn't seem to get any better. Or is that a misnomer and a stereotype?
I think it's probably a misnomer. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, because I know, like, obviously I could be bigger. That would help with my deadlift. Or is it just like people get too fat?
Yeah, I was going to say, when you get significantly fatter and your belly's in the way, that makes it way harder. Absolutely. Like, there's a point where it's going to kind of support your leverages a little bit and feel like a little bit of a spring cushion down there. Beyond that, it's just going to get in the way of your arms and your legs and make it feel like shit.
I do have this idea in my head that squatting with a big belly would feel good, because you know how like squatting with a little goblet feels good because you just hold the goblet out in front of yourself. Can you like lean back against the belly? Like, is that a thing, or like it pulls you down in between your hips?
Yeah, well, it's body proximation, right? So it's things hitting other things, which creates automatic stability. You get the reverse problem.
Oh, tummy on femur.
Yeah, you get the
Dig a
reverse
hole.
problem with people who lose heaps of weight. They often hurt their backs real bad, especially if they're strong. They lose their belly and they lose that stability, and they haven't been used to sort of like controlling those joints. Now they're exposed and out of control. They often fuck their backs really bad.
Yeah, like squatting a maximal squat through an extra 2 inches of ROM or something like that. If those tissues haven't, say you've had that belly for like 10 years, like that'd be insane stress on the system potentially.
Yeah, yeah. You'd be surprised how common it is.
Yeah. Speaking of body comp and powerlifting, I know my boss is quite adamant on the whole theory of hypertrophy is your calorie surplus, and it's not a specific hypertrophy phase. Could you go over, like, because I haven't really wrapped my head around it, how some lifters may go for like a 2-year stint of just focusing purely on developing developing contractile tissue instead of hitting toning back down the big main 3 lifts? And
I
like,
don't know if Tom
sure.
does that or do.
Well, I was going to say, so the question you asked before that I never got the chance to answer was about the pendulum swinging, right? And the trend these days has swung back to, and people think it's new. People think it's like new school programming. It's actually super old school programming. It's like Shaco style. It's swung back to this ultra specific squat, bench, deadlift 400 times a week, very minimal accessories, really effective at getting people really strong, really fast, but having no base of support to the point where if they get out of shape a little bit, something breaks. It's really breeding either rapid gains and then injury stagnation, or rapid gains by maximizing things like leverages by shortening ranges of motion, but never getting any bigger or stronger. And as a result, like you see, and people get blinded by it. You know, you see a 66 kilo lifter doing a sumo deadlift of like 330. Like, this kid is strong as fuck. You watch them 2 years later, they're still doing 330.
Same shit.
To me, that's a bad powerlifter. You didn't get any stronger. But to everyone else, it's like they're 66 and pulling 330. How is that a bad powerlifter? Powerlifters should be getting better, right? And so my programming kind of bucks the trend of where the modern, which is also old school direction is, where I program very little squat, bench, deadlift. So like my best lifters, well, my lifters, even natty, not natty, male, female, big, small, whatever, are very, very, very rarely squatting and benching, deadlifting more than once a week. And very minimal volume, heavy on accessories, lots of accessories, but very minimal volume on squat, bench, deadlift, because the movements themselves are very heavily skill based, and then strength can be produced in so many other ways. And then also you've got the idea of like hypertrophy takes a long time. You're not getting bigger in a 4-week hypertrophy block, so spend heaps of time laying down the foundation of getting bigger, so you can put strength in that muscle. And there's no reason why you can't get consistently strong as fuck by doing minimal volume. You know, look at these.
There's just other things that go nicely along with that as well, like getting to squat for the week, and you're like, oh, it's not versus like 5th squat session for the week, like like psychological aspects. It also seems underpinned. Just like, I'm a big fan of humans thrive in a variable environment, like cranking the specificity knob up. It opens people up to overuse injuries and stuff like that. Because I want to respect powerlifting as a skill. I do respect powerlifting as a skill. But do you think that people are leaning into that a bit too much when they're like, oh, I need to do it that many times per week?
I think people can't actually logically conclude what specificity means in powerlifting. So people think specificity is squat, bench, deadlift. Well, I mean, that's one very small part of specificity.
Like
specificity
at max for a single. Is that
exactly
what you were sort of getting at?
Yeah, specificity is the sport. And so you don't get bigger or stronger in a peak because you're not breaking adaptations. You're not able to do enough volume. You're not able to satisfy the principle of progressive overload. Peaking is just practice. Okay, so strip that away and think, what does actually make us stronger? We have to break adaptation. We have to do stuff. We have to build work capacity. We have to build the contractile tissue. We have to put strength in it. People think that just doing heaps of squat, bench, deadlift is going to make them better. It might improve the skill slightly, but it's so far away from specificity. It's like, rather than being specific to the goal of powerlifting, we need specific to the intermittent tasks. Like, what attributes do we need to build outside of peaking to make this person a better powerlifter? Peaking is the smallest piece of the puzzle. So we need to get bigger. We need to get stronger, and you can get bigger and stronger without doing 6 squat, bench, deadlift. And if anything, doing that much volume on the main lifts is just going to fuck you, like you said, mentally, but also physically. It's so draining. It takes away from all the work that you could be doing to get bigger and stronger otherwise.
Fuck, you'd hate S&C or like track and field when they talk about specificity, because I really appreciate what you just said of like, as soon as you're not doing like the fucking thing you compete in, you're so like miles away from specificity. Just don't worry about it so much. Because again, you've got track S&C coaches or just S&C coaches in general, like, oh, we've got to think about like how you squat as it relates to your sport. I'm like, you're off the pitch. You're not on the pitch. And I'm not that guy, but like, oh, if they don't do it on the pitch, don't do it. I'm a very general guy, but just framing what you're doing as general. Because S&C coaches would be like, same joint angles. But I'm like, what about the velocity? What about the environment? Or even just like the emotional fucking investment of being in the competition arena? Like,
yeah. The way I explain it to people when it comes to like writing strength training programs for people not doing powerlifting, for people doing sports of any level, is that the stuff we do in the gym is the accessories to squat, bench, deadlift. What do you do with accessories? Well, you go up the further away you are from competition. You ramp them down when you're getting closer to competition. And we don't make every single accessory try and look exactly like a squat or a bench or a deadlift. We appreciate the attributes that we can build in them that can support the squat, bench, and deadlift. It's like, that's what you do in the gym for S&C, right? You get stronger. That's the strength part. You do conditioning stuff. That's the conditioning part. Let them play the sport when they play the sport. The hardest thing for coaches is dealing with the parents. Like when the parents is like, I saw this on YouTube. My son needs to do this. Like, yeah. I had a kid who was really high in rugby, and then he switched to gridiron, and then eventually he went on to get a scholarship and moved to the States. And as he started to get better and better at gridiron, his dad every session was like, we need to be doing this stuff. We need to be doing this stuff. We need to be doing cleans and jerks. We need to be doing snatches. It's like, oh, he's going to be so shit at them that they're going to defeat the purpose of what they're trying to achieve. Let's just do this other stuff that'll make him stronger and faster.
Fuck, would have been tempting though. Just whenever you got your hands on some talent, it's like, yeah, let's just let them run the entire playbook. Like, it makes you look like a weapon of a coach, even if you're not making them better at anything.
Exactly. What do you think of clean and jerks and snatches, like the ollie lifts, for strength and conditioning?
So this has been the most mismanaged public debate of all time. So I like them because I also need to contextualize how I see the role of S&C, because I think good S&C is most important for shit athletes. Because I think if you're a good athlete, you're just going to go do the fucking thing. But why I like it for average athletes is because anyone who's into the ollie lifts, they're going to be into their S&C. And I also think it sort of has built in, because people talk about negative transfer of training from smashing too much weight, putting on too much muscle, but like it sort of is this inbuilt thing of like, well, you've still got to be pretty agile. You've still got to be pretty mobile. I also think that there's a lot of dynamic correspondence between that and jumping, and also a lot of like the mid-propulsive upright shapes in sprinting. So it's more from that perspective. I don't like people saying that it's the same as a trap bar jump, because you can't finish as hard and fully extend. And then there's much less of a catching component. And also like people say like, oh, just do a loaded jump. I can clean and jerk 140 kilos. I'm not doing a trap bar jump with 140. Like it just gets really hard to manage at a certain point. I think it's a stupid debate because people who are fans of Olympic lifting will say that it's compulsory. That's it's absolutely not compulsory. We've just seen too many good athletes who haven't done it. I also think a misnomer as to why a lot of coaches shy away from the Olympic lifts is perceived complexity. Whereas they're actually not that complex. So once you accept that, oh, you can actually teach pretty much fucking anyone to do one, especially if they're a good athlete, in about 20 minutes, that's just like, why were we worried about it? But again, it was the perception that you had to have perfect technique to make them safe enough to do that made people burn, 12 weeks of S&C just on teaching someone to power clean a barbell. So it's like, if you like them, get down on it. If you can't coach it, don't bother.
For context, I did teach the kid how to clean and jerk and snatch, but I literally just recited the California strength videos. Jump catch.
Honestly, that's pretty fucking good. And that's actually the caveat. Like, so something that may have applied to your context is if I was preparing a kid to go into a college scenario, they have to know.
Yeah, sure.
It's just
Yeah.
Purely just because they're going to run into some dogmatic coach in the college system who realistically is going to be like, I don't like you. You're a pain in the ass because you can't power clean. So like just cultural sort of differences and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Let's get up these reactions because Tom's a busy man and he's already given us a fair bit of his time. But let's have a look at these young superstars that Thomas LILLEY has got on his book. So you're building quite the reputation of not only having one of the strongest powerlifting rosters in the world, but where the fuck are you getting these young freaks from? That sounded way too aggressive. But Jesus Christ, can you talk about Cole and Theo? What's going on there?
Yeah, I just sent through two of my lifters who are both.
Is this on
young.
IG to me?
Yeah.
I think I had them queued up. I had both of these queued up. I read your mind. Don't worry.
Yeah. So Colton currently has the number 6 male dots of all time. He's only been competing a few years. He's just turned 23. But at under 110, he weighed in 108. He went 415, 222.5, 415. And yeah, this is the video he just pulled the other day, is 430 kilo deadlift with no peak. This was just for fun. He's just like, I want to do a push-pull comp in 3 weeks. I'm like, yeah, let's go for it. Did a single or two on the way up, and then he pulled this 413. Just crazy. Yeah, he weighed in at 109, 430 kilos, and it was easy as well. He had a lot more in the tank.
So I imagine Cole and Theo just cannot catch a rugby ball. What's that? Explain that to me. How'd
Here we go.
I actually don't know either of their sporting backgrounds, to be honest. So
look at this.
Colton's in South Africa.
Damn.
I know you don't love RPE, but could you put an RPE on that for me, Tom?
I don't know. That looked like RPE 7, 6
or sumo
7.
deadlifts a bit. Is Cole the kind of guy? Can he grind a sumo? Like,
yeah, he can pull a lot slower than this for sure.
Oh, okay.
Like I would have been confident. Strength wise, 450 would have been there in terms of the system, but I don't know if his grip would have held out because he just hasn't had a lot of time up over 400 with his hook grip.
What are your thoughts on people hook grip and heavy deads? I've seen people sort of going off hook grip. I feel like hook grip had a real moment where people like, if you want to be a world-class deadlifter, figure out how to hook grip. People sobered up on that a lot due to just hand conditioning, it seems. Do you have any opinions? Do you let your lifters do what they do?
No, do what they do. I think a lot of people thought that somehow it made like the range of motion shorter, or somehow it made it easier, which I don't buy into at all. I don't think it makes that significant a difference. Like, put it this way, if you protract your shoulders or round your thoracic forward, eventually in a powerlifting competition, you have to pull them back to neutral. So that movement has to occur somewhere. It has to occur somewhere. And a lot of the times, people who make that trade-off at the floor then have to then lose it at the top at lockout. I mean, that's not necessarily got to do with hook grip, but that often comes with hook grip. People are reaching really far down. I don't think it was the game changer everyone thought it was going to be.
Yeah, because you definitely can't do the fingertip grip with the hook grip. It's like, it's got to be quite deep in the hand.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the go? How fingertip is it with the over-under grip? Because did Theo switch back to over-under recently?
He did, yeah. So he was hook grip before.
Here's my real favorite. I like Cole, but I really like Theo.
Yeah, Theo's a monster. 20 years old.
20. Wow.
Yeah.
20.
So
what's his body weight?
He weighed in at just over 140 for this competition. So he's a big boy. He last year we set this year? Yeah, this year we set the biggest teen total of all time. So that was a big achievement for him earlier in the year at 19. Went 1,012.5, I think.
Oh my God.
But maybe 1,010.
And to your longevity point, like, I've just been thinking, I'm like, we just need, all he needs to do is just stay healthy and keep going. Like, you'd assume you keep him in the sport for 5 years.
Yeah. So Theo's been public about his foray into using performance enhancing drugs. He's been very public and open and honest about it all. And I mean, again, it's one thing that I'm not going to tell him exactly what to take and how much to take. He sees himself as a little bit of a chemist, and he's put a lot of time and energy and effort into researching things very in depth and getting good guidance around that. So he's got his head screwed on with this stuff a lot more than the average lifter, let alone a lot more than the average 20-year-old. So I'm confident in Theo's ability to chase longevity. He's not letting ego get in the way of anything, especially initially when we first started working together, there was a lot of back and forth. And I mean, this is coaching 101, right? Our job is to build trust with these lifters. And once we develop trust, I love working with Theo because we have a great relationship as just like chatting, but also a great coaching relationship. He's very open and willing to listen, which, I mean, sounds like it should be that. But if you're the strongest teenager in the world, if you're literally 20 years old and having a crack at the biggest deadlift of all time after a couple of years of lifting, it would be fair for you to have a giant ego on you. Like so
a couple of years.
Yeah, the fact that he's willing to listen to me. Theo's been lifting or powerlifting significantly longer than Colton. But
you'd just be like, what are these idiots doing? You just rip it. You know,
yeah. Theo takes a very thoughtful approach. So I'm confident in his longevity. And I have no doubt that he'll set that all-time deadlift record within the next year. It'd be cool to see him do the all-time deadlift record without straps as well, as in the powerlifting record. That would have been just the deadlift record.
No, it's not. It's finally not Benny Magnuson, isn't it? It's
it's Dan Grigsby. Yeah, 467.5.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's the most he's done without any straps or anything?
410.
410. Okay.
But he like based on him pulling this 477 and going for that 506, I'd be confident he'd be in the mid fours right now. That was a little while ago, and he's put in a lot of work since then. So yeah, I'm curious to see what we'll be able to do next year. Again, the rate limiter with a lot of these people that are having rapidly increasing deadlifts is just grip strength. It's just being able to hold onto the bar. So far, it hasn't proven to be an issue with Theo since he switched to mixed grip, but going from 410 to 450 is a big leap. So yeah, I mean, time will tell when we do some big comps next year.
We're literally going to see 600 with straps before we see 500 with bare hands.
Whoa, yeah, fuck.
Like just the way especially again with what Theo's doing. Again, we need to see him, I guess, without straps. He's progressing so fast that it's hard to even know what you're actually looking at sometimes.
It says in the video description that he attempted 506. How did that look?
Yeah, do you have the files?
Yeah, if you go to my Instagram page, it'll be on that.
Oh, okay.
So he only posted the 477. I posted both.
Give us a gaze of that. While you're pulling that up, I have one last question for Tom. For lifters who might be listening to this and maybe they're moderately competitive and they're benching 3 to 4 times a week, but that has sort of been how they've progressed their bench press. They have a certain set and rep scheme and a certain frequency, and they stall and they add another day of bench press. Well, actually, I guess it's a 2-part question. How would you go about going from, and I'm sure you've taken people on this journey of 4, 5, 6, 7 time a week bencher, reducing their frequency? Do you go out of their way to reduce frequency? And then how do you troubleshoot rather than just adding another day of bench?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in order to troubleshoot anything, you have to know what the trouble is that you're shooting. And so oftentimes the trouble is not a lack of frequency. By adding more quantity, you're often decreasing quality. Like you can't bring the same intensity to a bench session if you've done 2 of them in the 2 days prior. So it's more about assessing, okay, well, has this frequency stopped working? More frequency probably isn't the answer. It's probably identifying what is the hole in my bench press that's stopping me. And again, for me, that's going to be having a deep dive into technique. Where are you failing? Why are you failing at that point? What's weak? Let's address that rather than just doing more of the same thing and hoping that it fixes it. Because this is the thing. This is the thing that people get blinded by. You can strengthen a shitty system. Yeah. Like, I mean, it's the triceps at lockout thing. Oh, I fail at lockout, therefore my triceps are weak. Well, no, if your triceps are weak, you'd never be able to unrack it in the first place. So they do 6 months of like a shitload of tricep work, a bunch of benching. 6 months later, they're 2.5, 5 kilos stronger. Oh, I got stronger. My triceps were weak. No, you just fucking trained for 6 months.
Yeah.
Big difference. And so
It's
I
so
mean,
hard to be scientific about it because there
Of
is never
course.
just one variable changing.
Of course, of course. And I mean, as a lifter, when you're not taking that mindset of assessing the variables, and especially as a lifter, when you've got no other case studies to compare to, this is the benefit of coaches, right? We see this in multiple case studies of various shapes and sizes and forms. That's why we can be confident with the answer. So instead of adding another day, get a coach. If you've already got a coach, brainstorm with them to try and find out what the answer is.
And just the second part of the question, like say you get someone and you're like, say you're onboarding me and I'm like, yeah. So, I'm 80 kilos, bench 170. Oh no, let's go 130 kilos. Let's keep it.
Let's go 170.
No, I'm a 170 bench. I'm a big dog. 4 times a week. Are you immediately thinking in your head, I'm plugging this guy into my system. I'm going to immediately put him back to 1 and maybe they will tank their bench. I don't like play that out, or like, do you just leave them as they are if they're progressing fine? How do you sort of play that out based on the assumptions of your system?
I have to assume that my system is the system that I'm going to roll
the system is king.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, I'm not gonna change my system. But then why the fuck are they getting coached by me? Like, why pay me to tell you how to train the way that you already train? It doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So I have to have faith and confidence in that for sure. But in order to do that, I have to have good justification when they ask me the 10 million questions about why are we doing this? And if I can't answer that, I need to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Damn, I wonder if I've been too flexible in meeting people where they're at, because I do just want to stand by my system, but then it is on me to have the track record to be able to enforce that.
Oh, and don't get me wrong, there'll be compromise sometimes, especially in that trust building process, right? And if you're brand new and you're like, I can't handle that mentally, like I'm going to go backwards, well, let's do 2 days a week. Let's meet in the middle, there's ways we can satisfy certain needs of a lifter without compromising our underlying system. Just like if someone's like, oh, I really want to do heavy singles. I don't believe that's going to be the best way to go, but it's also not going to create enough fatigue to create a problem. And so if that's going to be the thing that builds the trust while I show them how everything works, there's no problem in doing that. That took me a long time to learn, to be willing to be like, I don't have to meet someone completely where they are, but it's okay to add things in as long as I'm confident that they're not going to hurt the system, making them progress. Because I wouldn't do that if I believe it's going to sacrifice their progress, because then I don't believe that's good coaching.
Yeah.
If I'm doing something that they want to do and I believe it's going to hold them back, then that's negligence as a coach.
That's a fucking art form. An art form I haven't mastered yet, but through more conversations like this and actually practicing coaching itself, I hope to get there one day. Tom, thank you so much for your time today and all your thoughtful responses. What have you got coming up that you'd like people to know about, and where can people find you and keep up with everything that's going on?
We've released the Zero app. I haven't plugged it too hard because I'm still refining it and adding some cool touches. So if you want to learn more about our training, you can jump on board and get on that. And people can find us on all the social media platforms. Just search for Zero with a W. So it's pronounced Zero. You don't say Zero W. Stands for Zero Weakness. Zero_weakness on Instagram. And you can find all the other gyms and everything from there.
Amazing. One coming to your area soon.
Maybe.